Actor Jonathan Majors is on trial in New York City for allegedly becoming violent on March 24th, 2023 with his then-girlfriend, Grace Jabbari. Just a quick note, I previously said that the incident happened on March 25th, 2023, but I do want to correct that because I have seen it reported that apparently the incident happened on the night of March 24th, 2023, and that he was arrested on March 25th. To be honest, there has been some conflicting reporting on these two dates, but I'm going to go with that moving forward. I don't like making errors, but when I do catch them, I do try to correct them as soon as possible. Anyway, like I said in the day one recap, on Monday, both sides gave their opening statements. While the prosecution said that this trial would reveal that Majors has a pattern and practice of manipulation and violence and abuse of Ms. Jabbari, the defense said that Jabbari is in fact the aggressor who attacked him and that Majors is the real victim here. And in my day one recap, I gave my thoughts on which of these two universes of facts seemed to make the most sense based on the way that it had been laid out in the opening statements. Most particularly, I focused on the two different explanations for why Jabbari went out clubbing with strangers after this alleged incident. And I have to say, I got a lot of feedback on that part, both positive and some people pushing back on what I said. And I want you guys to know that as this trial progresses, I'm going to be giving my thoughts on the evidence and on the arguments, and all of those thoughts are going to be based on the evidence that's presented and the other aspects that I see. But know that I'm always open to the idea that there may be some aspects that I haven't considered. For example, some of you pointed out the fact that abuse typically happens behind closed doors, and so an abuse victim might actually feel safer out in public because it would mean a lower likelihood that the abuser would be able to act out against them. And I'll admit that is something that I definitely hadn't considered, but now that it's been brought up, it's a very good point. So thank you so much for pointing that out. It definitely does open up the case a little bit for me personally going into day two. And like I said, I don't have a strong opinion going into this, although I have identified some other parts that are troublesome for the state, such as the nature of her alleged injuries and how and where and when she got them. But that's the thing. Those questions are questions that either will or won't be answered by the state. By identifying those issues, I'm not saying that this case definitively rests in favor of Majors. I'm only saying that if those questions are not answered by the end of this trial with logical, reasonable explanations, those gaps absolutely will favor Majors. And that again is because of the fact that it's the state that has the burden of proving this case beyond a reasonable doubt. Okay, so with all that said, on to day two. On day two of this trial, there was only one witness who testified, and that was Grace Jabbari herself. In case you're unfamiliar with the structure of trials and how they all work out, the witness testimony is structured in a very similar way as the trial as a whole. The witness gets called by whichever side is presenting their case in chief. And that side will start by doing a direct examination. These are all open-ended questions, and they're not supposed to be leading the witness. They're supposed to basically tell the story in their own words. Then the opposing side gets up and they do a cross-examination where the testimony of that witness gets tested, often with pressured, uncomfortable questions. The structure of these questions typically is the inverse of a direct examination. Usually you'll see a lot of leading questions. This is basically the cross-examining attorney is telling their side, giving their narrative, but sort of doing it through the witness on cross-examination. And cross-examination, as you can imagine, is never a fun experience. But any sort of mess that comes about through a cross-examination is often cleaned up through the opportunity for a redirect by the side that initially put this witness on the stand. Depending on the courtroom, this can potentially go back and forth several times after a redirect where the opposing side gets to do a re-cross-examination and then a redirect by the other side and then a re-cross and so on and so forth. But some courtrooms are a little bit more limited as to how many times they can go back and forth. Either way, each time this tennis ball sort of goes over to the other side of the net, the scope of the conversation gets narrowed so that it only touches on subjects that were basically discussed in the previous level. Anyway, so with all of that out of the way, let's focus in on what Jabbari's testimony actually was. She didn't finish her direct testimony on day 2, and so she'll be continuing on to day 3 when we expect to hear her cross-examination. Now, I did see a little bit on the internet about how in the beginning of her testimony, she talked about how she was really nervous and she was really smiling at the jury quite a bit. Sometimes I feel like a broken record when I say this about these trials that don't have cameras in the courtroom, but I really, really wish that we could see this testimony for ourselves. This is especially true in a case like this, where a lot of the evidence is reliant on verbal testimony. And so the jury is having to analyze things like speech patterns and body language of these witnesses. And this kind of behavioral description about her smiling a lot at the jury could mean any number of things. For one, testifying at trial is intimidating on its own. But to be testifying as not just a key witness in a trial, but as someone who is the accuser and who knows that she's going to be grilled for the allegations that she's made against the defendant, that's something on an entirely different level. So if you do see descriptions like that, or you hear about descriptions like that, be wary that it could mean a number of things. This could be someone like Amber Heard tripping over herself to try to put on an act to connect with the jury. Or this could be someone who is genuinely very nervous and that this is just how she sort of responds to pressure in these kinds of situations. But anyway, on day 2, she opened up by talking about how they met and what the relationship was like in the beginning. She said that they met on the UK set of Ant-Man in September 2021. She described their romance as a whirlwind. She said that he told her that he loved her pretty quickly in the relationship and he would do things like write her poems. But then in December 2021, just a few months into their relationship, things changed when she went out to visit him in Atlanta when she mentioned her ex-boyfriend. She said that the way that it came up was he was giving her instructions on how to act when she met his dogs for the first time. She responded that she had only had experience with one dog, and that was one that belonged to her ex-boyfriend. And so she says that he responded by getting really upset and saying things with a raised voice like, "How dare you mention him? How dare you mention his dog?" And then she says that he started ripping into the physical appearance of her ex and how this was a huge embarrassment to Majors that Jabbari had dated that guy. As an editorial note, I will say that there often is disagreement as to what is considered abuse and what is not considered abuse. Where is the line between an argument, even a heated argument, and an abusive incident? Obviously, when words turn into physical actions, that's one way to measure, but what about a situation where it's limited to words and tone and posturing? These are sensitive questions that people will often have very strong feelings about and can really only be answered on a case-by-case basis. And certainly, it seems that the prosecution wants the jury to start out with the idea that this exchange is an example of abuse by Majors. And I do expect the defense to work to minimize that appearance on their cross-examination. Anyway, Jabbari also then mentioned a time when she was in an area that didn't have cell phone reception, and Majors got really angry with her over that. And then she talked about another incident in July 2022 where she said that he threw a candle at the wall during an argument. She said that at the time, he was struggling with a strict dieting and workout regimen to train up for a role as a bodybuilder. And she said he lashed out at her as a result. She apparently took photos of the dent in the wall and broken glass that was littering the floor in order to document it, and those photos were also shown to the jury. One thing to note here is that it was reported that Jabbari did not testify about Majors laying his hands on her before the March 24th incident. But she said she feared him physically as a result of these various outbursts. She also talked about a time in September 2022 when she had brought a female friend home after a trip to the pub and they were both tipsy. The next day, she said Majors responded by getting really angry and calling her an alcoholic and berating her, and then she says that he ripped her headphones out of her ears. In response, she said that she left the home, but after he sent her overtures by text where he was saying that he loved her and that he wanted to marry her, she says she came back. He had allegedly asked her not to tell anyone because it would, quote, ruin his plan for them. Then she talked about another incident not long after, which she said that she recorded with her iPhone. Now, in opening statements yesterday, the state indicated that Majors had told Jabbari that essentially he wanted her to emulate former First Lady Michelle Obama or Martin Luther King Jr.'s wife, Coretta Scott King. And this recording apparently captured the audio of that statement. Now, a lot of people on social media definitely pounced on this after the opening statements came out, questioning how Majors could ask Jabbari to be these two women. And part of this is because, well, there's a very obvious difference between Jabbari and Obama and King. Obama and King are strong Black women and prominent figures in American history, and particularly in the context of Black history in America. And there's no way for Jabbari to ever be that. She is apparently half white and half Middle Eastern, and so comes from a different cultural subset. But from what I have seen written down of quotes and things from this conversation, from this audio recording, it sounds like it was a calm conversation with no rage or threats or cursing. And it sounds like what Majors was saying wasn't that he wanted Jabbari to actually be Michelle Obama or Coretta Scott King. Rather, he was saying that they were examples of great women who supported great men. And he apparently said that what he was looking for was a woman whose behavior wasn't going to reflect poorly on his image, for example, by going out and drinking and whatnot. Specifically, he was quoted as saying, "I'm a great man. I am doing great things. The woman that supports me, the one I support, needs to be a great woman and make sacrifices." And he reportedly said, "I do great things for my culture and for the world. The woman that supports me needs to be a great woman. 2 nights ago, you did not do that, which took away from the plan." And I understand there are people out there who will still look at that and find it extremely distasteful. Telling a woman that she needs to make sacrifices and change her behavior because she'll reflect poorly on his image is something that not everyone likes to see. But that on its own, to me, doesn't sound like abuse. It sounds like someone who is very ambitious and is making it clear that he has something particular in mind that he is looking for in a woman and in a partner, and that he doesn't want to lower his own standards. And keep in mind, just like women are allowed to be ambitious and have high standards, so are men. And yeah, some people hate the fact that he said that the woman in his life needs to be willing to make sacrifices. But keep in mind, he might be saying that because he himself has had to make a lot of sacrifices to get to where he was at that time. After all, he is a Yale-educated actor, and he's come really far in his career at this point in the timeline when this audio was recorded. And look, I know this is not going to be the most popular thing to say in this day and age, but if you are in fact aiming for greatness, for high ambitions in anything in life, you simply have to make sacrifices. And if you have those high ambitions, the partner that you choose also has to be on board for what's necessary to meet those ambitious goals, or the relationship simply won't work out. And it could be that he's thinking, look, I've done so much and sacrificed so much to get to this point in my career and in my life, and I want someone on this journey with me. And if she's going to reap the benefits of all of my hard work, I want her to uphold a particular standard herself. Again, I don't expect folks to like that, but that could very well be where his thoughts were. And not everyone wants greatness. Not everyone wants to have the highest ambitions, in which case sacrifice isn't something that they may feel that they really need to accept as much. But if you look at interviews of basically anyone at the top of their field where they're talking about how they got there, they'll talk about the hard work and the sacrifices that they made along the way. For some reason, the top person that comes to my mind is Michael Jordan. He had an incredible work ethic to get to be the top basketball player, arguably of all time. And hell, a former Navy SEAL, David Goggins, has made a whole career on this topic. And there is a reason why he has such a hardcore following with this kind of message. And there's also something to be said about this. Given the fact that Majors is an actor who already at this point was in the public eye and on an upward trajectory in his career, I can see reputation as being very, very important to him. In Hollywood, reputation is huge. How many actors have we heard about, for example, who have a hard time getting work because they're difficult to work with? And if Majors is someone who wants to present himself to Hollywood and to the world as someone who is fairly straight-laced and serious and professional in order to make an impact on the world with his career, having a partner that goes out and parties a lot could contradict that. I'm just saying. I do understand that Jabbari herself said that she understood his words to mean that she needed to essentially submit her own goals as secondary to his in order to be in a relationship with him. And if that's the way that he intended it, that does sound a bit misogynistic. But seeing the quotes from that conversation that have come out, I don't necessarily see it from that perspective. Rather, I see it as a difference in levels of ambition and understanding what's required to meet that ambition. Anyway, I'll step off my soapbox and let's get back to the testimony. Jabbari also said that on multiple occasions, Majors threatened to unalive himself after getting angry with her. And she said that this drew her in deeper to the relationship. As a result, she said she would typically put his emotional needs before hers, and she said that she didn't tell anyone about these incidents as Majors had requested. This in turn made her feel isolated and very dependent on Majors. She said that she pulled away from family and friends who were unaware of these incidents, and her confidence really sank. Now, the judge also gave an instruction to the jury somewhere in the morning that this testimony up to this point has only been for purposes of background and not intended as evidence of Majors having a pattern of committing the crimes he's accused of in the trial. Honestly, I don't know that this instruction is going to help clarify this for the jury. They went through multiple incidents that certainly sound like the state is laying down a pattern of abuse by Majors from essentially the beginning of their relationship. But now the jury is hearing from the judge, disregard all of that. That's not to be considered evidence of pattern of abuse. So the jury could honestly be thinking, when do we get to the part where we hear about the pattern of abuse then? Like, we were promised a pattern of abuse by the prosecution's opening statement, so when do we get that? And remember what I said about opening statements being basically a list of promises made by the attorneys as to what the evidence would show to the jury. If they get to the end of Jabbari's testimony and there's really only an allegation of abuse from March 24th of this year, this pattern evidence ends up being an empty promise, which the jury is likely to note. And if that's the case, that's likely to harm the state's case here. Anyway, in the afternoon, Jabbari continued her direct examination, and here she talked about what actually happened on the night of March 24th. She said that the day started out really well. He was really nice, really loving, and very sweet. But then as they left their apartment for Brooklyn that night, his mood changed. When they were in the elevator, she said that he commented on her outfit, saying that she had too many buttons that were undone and that she needed to button them up. And so she fixed it. At some point while they were out, she said that he told her that he was angry with her for talking about his behavior with one of his friends named Priya. She said that he then threatened to unalive himself before calming down. Then in the car ride back from Brooklyn, she was leaned up on him in the backseat of the SUV with her head on his shoulder. She was sitting to his left behind the driver, and he was sitting on the right behind the front passenger seat. And she said she saw a text come in from a woman named Cleopatra with a link to a romantic song by D'Angelo. She said that the text read, "Wish I was kissing you right now." Jabbari then testified that Majors pleaded with her, "It's not what it seems, baby. Baby, it's not what it seems." But then she said that she took the phone from him and turned her back toward the left passenger side door to secure the phone with both hands and to get a better look. She said that Majors tried prying the phone from his hands unsuccessfully. Then she said that she felt the weight of him on top of me as he tried to pry the phone from my fingers. She said that in the midst of all of this, he pulled her finger, twisted her arm back behind her, and hit her in the face after she grabbed the phone. And for her part, she said that she curled her body to protect herself and that she felt a really hard blow against her head that took her aback. Next, the state showed surveillance footage of them exiting the car in the midst of this fight. According to descriptions from inside the courtroom, this surveillance footage shows Majors getting out through the right side back door of the car and then Jabbari following him. Now, one thing that's interesting is that this video surveillance footage has been described in many articles as Majors throwing her into the car repeatedly, and that's also how the state characterized it in their opening statement. But notes from some others in the courtroom say otherwise, that this looked much more like she was fighting to get out of the car and that he was trying to keep her inside in order to restrain her. And she did testify that he was trying to get me off of him and he was trying to get me not to follow him. And according to this video that was shown in court, he apparently tried 3 times to keep her in the car and was ultimately unsuccessful. And after this third attempt, he runs up the street and she follows him. She also testified herself that he was kind of running away. So then there was more surveillance footage showing Jabbari running after Majors for a good 5 to 6 city blocks, which she said was probably a couple minutes long. This pursuit ended in a parking lot where Jabbari said that she couldn't find him. Then she said that she stopped in front of a building on Lafayette Street where she met a group of strangers and told them that Majors had had her phone in her purse, and then she went clubbing with them. But before she went out with them, video surveillance showed Majors walking by after she met up with these people. And once Jabbari catches sight of him, she apparently runs after him again and he runs off. So I have to say, this video surveillance obviously can't tell us what happened inside the car during the alleged altercation. But every bit of objective video surveillance footage here so far appears to show Majors trying to get away from Jabbari and Jabbari chasing after him. Even with Majors pushing her back into the car, from what I've seen in terms of description of the surveillance footage, this all seems to suggest that she's the one that is pursuing and therefore the one that appears to be in an aggressor kind of role. This is not great for the prosecution, in my opinion. That said, I am not in the courtroom, obviously, and I can't see the testimony for myself, so I can't tell how Jabbari is coming across as she's describing all of this on the stand. Now, another thing about this altercation is she was also asked whether she had scratched Majors on his face or arm, and she denied doing so. Now, photos of Majors from the next morning with scratches on his face and arm have surfaced on the internet, so I anticipate these getting introduced at cross-examination. But I would anticipate the prosecution questioning where these scratches came from, similar to how the defense is likely to question how Jabbari got her injuries that were on display the next morning. But regardless, Jabbari is likely to be confronted by these photos on cross, and we'll see how that goes. Now, she was also asked about her injuries in this moment. She testified that as she was chasing him, she wasn't focused on anything but the infidelity. She was asked multiple times about it, and she basically said that after chasing him, she was worried about who's that girl. And she said that it didn't register into her nervous system what had happened to her physically. She did also explain that she is a classically trained dancer, meaning a lot of years of dancing ballet. She said that she's danced in pointe shoes her whole life and that she's performed with a broken rib before. So it could very well be that she's used to essentially punishing her body and that she in fact has a high pain tolerance. Adrenaline could also help to mask the pain for a period of time, so there's some room for lack of awareness of a fractured finger. That said, I can't say I'm personally completely convinced. She said she could still do things with her injured hand, and she admitted to signing receipts for drinks as well as holding 2 phones with both hands to call an Uber. Now, in terms of her reasoning for going out afterwards, this is, I think, an important point for a lot of people. At least it is for me anyway. Of course, I said this in the day one recap. And here's what Jabbari had to say about that. She said, "I didn't want to be alone at that point. I was just trying to suppress the sadness. I felt sad so deeply in my heart. But I was also really grateful for these 3 people who had saved me." Now, I don't know how the jury is going to take her characterization that these strangers saved her, given what they saw of the surveillance footage of her chasing Majors throughout. Honestly, in circumstances like this, when a witness elaborates or dramatizes the testimony to benefit one side, even if just a little bit, the jury has a tendency to sniff that out pretty quickly, and it creates skepticism and distrust in that witness. She would have been much better off by being a little more muted in the way that she characterized the role that these strangers played, given how that video surveillance footage looks to an objective observer. Now, I'm not saying that this one word kills the prosecution's case entirely, but it is something that could start to erode any trust that the jury may have in her accuracy and her truthfulness. Now, to wrap up her testimony for the day, she also said that these 3 people invited her to celebrate a birthday with them, and she brought them a bottle of champagne as a thank you and then danced with them. She said that she did, in fact, begin icing her finger at the bar, knowing that the next morning she'd be in a lot of pain. She also said that she drank champagne and tequila, and then got to a point where, as a woman, she got a little nervous about drinking any further and decided to go home. And that's where trial ended on day 2 of New York v. Jonathan Majors. Going into day 2, I will say I thought back on my comments from day 1 about seeking refuge in a public space. And like I said before, those are absolutely valid points and something for me to continue to consider in cases like this moving forward. In this particular context, though, I think that the video surveillance of her chasing him out of the car and afterwards, and even making chase again after she was quote unquote saved by these strangers, I don't know. She said that she was afraid, but objectively speaking, it does not appear that way to me personally. But again, maybe there's something here that I haven't considered. What do you think? Do you think that the prosecution's case still lines up with their narrative, or do you think that this video surveillance starts to erode that? Do you think that I'm making too big of a deal of Jabbari saying that these strangers saved her after showing this footage of her chasing Majors? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. I love the discussions that are happening in the comments from both sides, and I look forward to hearing again from all of you. In other words, tell me where I'm wrong. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this, or at least found it interesting or informative. And if you did, I would love it if you could hit the like button. It does help us with the YouTube algorithm gods. And if you're new here and you want to see more trial recaps like this, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you can find out when the next video is uploaded. See you in the next one.